Welcome back to the Trees and Lines podcast. In this part two of our two-part discussion with Anna Marie Will and Eric Brown from SMUD, we continue our conversation around insurance in the vegetation management industry. Have a listen. Hope you enjoy.
You're employed by SMUD, right?
Yes.
And so, but you've lived on both sides of the fence. Your services must be in demand. I mean, your knowledge base and being able to help the rest of the market, not just SMUD. So do you end up engaging with other organizations? Do people come after you for counsel? Like, what's your relationship with the broader market?
I don't have that kind of relationship with the broader market. What you're talking about is probably more at the insurance broker level, because they are able to actually touch more industries. I'm looked at as more of a localized expert, SMUD, California. Brokers have national exposure and sometimes international exposure. So they're seeing what's going on worldwide, and folks will be looking to them as the experts in what is happening, not only in a state level, in a local level, but just, worldwide, basically.
Well, I got to say, so Anna Marie has been awful humble so far in the first portion of this podcast, and so we need to peel a few layers of the onion back here.
Please.
From my perspective, actually sitting in on many of these interviews, Anna Marie has a really special and unique set of skills, extreme knowledge and extreme expertise in the insurance market, understands peers, colleagues, those organizations, and has truly been able to curate all of our operational activities at a level that are understandable, that are digestible, and meaningful. And I wouldn't, yes, operational execution is important, but sharing the data with these markets in different platforms is truly important to the audience that you're sitting in front of. So the presentations, the slide decks, the content that's been curated and put together by Anna Marie and her team have been phenomenal, and it's been looked at as best in class, and has been said so multiple times, multiple meetings over multiple years. So she has been phenomenal at sharing our message, because we're really good at doing the work, but we may not always be the greatest at sharing all of the details that are really important to the market. And she's been able to do that phenomenally. And I would just ask Anna Marie to share a little bit more, some candid conversation from the underwriter meetings that we've had in the last couple of years, because they've gotten a whole lot more personable. They've gotten a whole lot more meaningful when they understand we're coming there showing our cards. We're not hiding anything.
Right.
And they understand that. And I think Anna Marie has got some really great quotes or content that she can share from certainly our most recent meetings that we've had in Bermuda in April.
SMUD makes a point annually of going out to meet with our carriers, whether they're, in London, in Bermuda. And in Bermuda, it's very important because they are not able to have discussions about their business operations, their willingness or not to provide coverage off island. So going out there means a lot to them, creating that personal relationship. But what I found is most important is getting to know them personally. So yes, we go to these meetings. Yes, we do these presentations that Eric's talking about, but we also spend time with them. We go to lunch with them. We will do activities with them, and we'll go to dinner. And so we get to know them as people, and that creates that trust so that they know that we're going to bring them not only the good side of what we do, but we're going to talk about where we can make improvements, so that they understand that we know that exposure, that we know we've got other things that need to be done. But what I really try to prepare for in these presentations is answering the questions before they ask them. So if we've had a bad fire year, if we're having a low rain year, we let them know, and we let them know how we're preparing for that. So what does that mean from a vegetation management standpoint? How are we going to address this dry fuel? Or if we've had a big rain year and we expect a lot of growth, how are we going to manage that? So I don't wait for them to ask the question. I bring it to them. What is our expected weather that we're going to see? What are the challenges that are going to develop from that? And how is SMUD going to address those? And so year after year, I don't have to bring them our basics of, how many lines do we have, how many miles of transmission or whatever that is. What I can talk about are the things that matter in the upcoming policy year. And that gives us a lot more time to talk about that, a lot more time for Eric to talk about the work that he's doing, which is so important. We don't have to talk about the basics of SMUD because they now know us as people, as an organization, and we've built that trust. So that is really key, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Eric.
You mentioned earlier, Anna Marie, that you guys report up into the CFO,
yes,
right, of the organization. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe paint a picture of your group, the different types of folks in it, the organizational structure?
So for me, I work in the Treasury Department under our treasurer, Russell Mills, and our group manages the cash flow ability of the organization. So we're preparing for big expenses. The insurance budget for SMUD is one of our larger expenses. So my team's job is to prepare for when we have to make these large cash outlays. And he reports up to our chief financial officer, which also oversees strategy and risk. Very unique for an organization, and it gives me a lot of insight into where are our dollars going from a capital outlay expenditure standpoint, as well as what do we have to use going forward, and develop that risk strategy, which helps me structure these insurance programs to effectively use our dollars. So if we know that, this is a lower risk for us, we're willing to take on more risk internally in what we call that self-insured layer before we transfer the risk to our primary insurer at the next level. And then it's, how many dollars can we spend initially before, we need insurance backing. So just having that support really makes a difference in how we structure our insurance towers.
I think it would be very helpful because I've talked to several people and their eyes roll in the back of their head when they start talking about the insurance and the different layers, and people start throwing around, well, it's general liability and it's this and that. And I think people are confused, at least when I'm talking to folks.
Nobody understands insurance.
Yeah. Can you simplify for us maybe the tower?
Sure.
And just take us through, hey, this is how it works. Here are the Tetris pieces. This is where wildfire tucks in. Do you think you could do that for us?
Great question.
Absolutely.
Great.
So general liability insurance is what we call a third-party coverage. What that means is it covers the costs that will be incurred by others, not the organization itself. So if we damage or harm someone else, that is what that coverage is for. And that is why wildfire coverage is typically included in general liability coverage. But you can buy wildfire-specific coverage. And so SMUD does both of those things. When we build a tower, at the bottom of that tower is that general liability coverage. So if you think of this in blocks, your first building block is that general liability wildfire combined coverage. And you'll buy that to a specific limit. It might be 10 million, it might be 20 million, whatever that might be. But that first layer is going to cover all of that risk. And then the question is, at what point do you need to stop or can you stop your general liability coverage? So do you need $100 million? Do you need $200 million? So you build that first primary block to include all of those perils. And then you start looking at how much wildfire coverage do I need? So if I've bought $100 million of combined coverage, do I need $300 million worth of wildfire coverage? So you're going to buy an additional $200 million. But most people aren't going to sell it to you in those kinds of blocks. And you also want to think about not putting all of your eggs in one basket. So you don't want to buy a $200 million block from one carrier, because if they go broke, you have no coverage. So what we do is it's called ventilating. You ventilate that coverage and you share it among many carriers. So you've got that first primary block that we talked about, and then you're going to put blocks on top of it. So you might buy those blocks in $10 million increments. So you'll have your next block of wildfire only coverage at 10 million. And then you might buy another $10 million block from someone else. So each block is going to have a different carrier and a different value. And that's going to give your program more security, because if you do have what's called a full limit loss, which means you have a $300 million wildfire, you will go through and you will collect that money from each of those carriers as you exhaust the block underneath it. So I hope that made it kind of clear to you.
No, that's good.
It does.
Okay.
Are there companies out there, insurance companies, that they say, hey, like, we only want to participate as like from fifth block up, and,
yes,
because they're trying to minimize their exposure, collect as many fees.
Absolutely. Those are called either excess carriers, depending on how they participate, or they might be reinsurance carriers. And reinsurance carriers actually insure an insurance carrier.
Right.
So
That's right.
It gets more complicated as you go up. And not only are there people that want to participate at those higher levels, sometimes people don't want to take that whole $10 million block and will do what's called a quota share. So they'll take maybe 20 or 50% of that 10 million, and another carrier will take the other 80 or 50%, depending on how you broke it up. Or you might even have 5 carriers participating in that $10 million block. So for instance, SMUD's insurance tower, it has that combined layer that I talked about at the bottom, and then the wildfire only specific coverage as we get higher. Our tower consists of almost 30 carriers participating either in solid blocks or in these quota share blocks building up to the top. The other alternative that we haven't talked about in SMUD is recently getting involved with is captives. So public agencies in the past have not utilized captives because they're really a tax vehicle for private industry. But they are far more useful now, given the rate increases, the premium increases that we're seeing, and SMUD is finding the value in using captives because we cannot, as an insurance purchaser, buy reinsurance directly, but a captive as an insurance company can buy reinsurance. So it gives us access to a market we didn't have, and it allows us to put money aside specifically for some of these risks that the market won't take. So a lot is going on in the insurance market.
I'm curious about your peer utilities. Eric, your peers probably aren't involved like you are with the insurance. Am I right in that?
Yeah, and I think you touched on that right out the gate, Phil, and it's a pretty good observation. I, frankly, for my first 20-plus years in the industry, never participated even in conversations, let alone meetings with underwriters in the UBM space. So I think it's an area that many utilities should kind of really listen into and understand that the underwriters are asking for this. That they are asking to have subject matter experts at the table to provide them the confidence that you're executing. You pointed out a plan that, yes, utilities do have plans, but the key element to that is, are you proactively executing on that plan, and are you delivering results?
Yeah, and I would say, Eric, that SMUD was unique in bringing our SMEs to the table, and now underwriters are asking others to do the same.
Yeah, it's a game changer. I think it's something that, a paradigm shift, if you will, in the industry that hasn't really happened in the past. It kind of shows you the silos that utilities still have, but the understanding from the underwriters and their education and their knowledge and experience, because they've had to be more and more engaged, more detail-oriented, better understood, so that they can make meaningful decisions on what risk they're going to accept and what risk they're not going to accept, is having unfiltered conversations with subject matter experts from the utility that are delivering the results. So they can ask as detailed a question as they want, and it isn't that it has to be written down and brought back or we'll get you an answer in the next couple of days. You have someone on the call that can actually provide a detailed, objective, highly accurate answer, and that's super meaningful to that audience.
Yeah, so I was thinking, who at the utility drives the incorporation of SMEs, and you're saying down the road it's going to be the underwriters driving it.
Right now, the underwriters are driving it. At SMUD, it was really our insurance program. As I was talking to Eric, and realizing how in depth this topic is, how much detail there was, I realized I was not the person to deliver that message. We have had underwriters ask questions as detailed as what kind of pesticides are you using, or weed control. What kind of chemicals are you using? I don't have the answer for that. I don't know what Eric's doing in the field, but he's able to answer that on the spot.
Well, they're asking super detailed questions.
Yes.
So it shows the level of education and understanding of the business or the risk that they're willing to engage in. They're asking specifics around integrated vegetation management.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
10 years ago, they had no discussion in that.
Yeah.
It was really clear to me that I would not be able to deliver it with the same enthusiasm, experience, and having him there. He's participated the last 2 years, and those have been the years where we have gotten so much good feedback in terms of really feeling like they had access to that expert, that they could ask any questions. And even after those meetings, they felt like they could reach out directly to Eric if they needed to with further questions. So just opening that line of access was so critical. And I think it's made a big difference in terms of folks wanting to participate in our program and bringing in new potential markets.
Eric, what would your advice to peers be, those that might be asked by their insurance group?
Well, I would say you've got peers and colleagues out there that have been there, so I would just recommend reaching out. We are certainly more than willing to share the platform and content that we've built. So that's the first step, I think, is you don't need to reinvent the wheel, frankly, at this point. But there is certainly a platform that you can follow. We'd be happy to share that with any peers and colleagues that are out there. But maybe even if they aren't being approached, I would probably be proactive internally, Phil. I mean, from my perspective, is now seek out your insurance team or your risk team and have that meaningful conversation of, I'm not sure exactly what you're providing the underwriters. I don't even know what the timeline you are on meetings, but how can I be engaged and how can I be part of the one's team at delivering the message and showing some of the great execution that we are delivering. Some of the operational results that will be meaningful for the underwriter community.
Yeah, and we've been talking about wildfire, and it just has amazed me to see the utilities in New England, all the way down the coast in the Midwest, writing wildfire mitigation plans.
Well, and I think that's one of the other components to this is wildfire is one item, right? And as we've seen recently in some very tragic and unfortunate incidents on tropical islands, frankly, no one is immune to a catastrophic fire of some kind. And we have peers and colleagues on a regular basis asking for feedback and guidance from the folks that have been out on the West for a long portion or their entire career, as far as upstate New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, areas that really never looked at wildfire risk before. It's actually resonating with CEOs and senior leadership of all of these utilities, because it only takes one event to impact one trust, confidence, and frankly, one of the items that I feel is kind of overlooked at times is organizational brand image in the communities you serve. You have one incident, and I don't think you ever repair your brand image if it's impactful enough to that community. And you can pay a lot in premiums, you can do a lot of operational good, you can do a lot of community engagement activities, but if you've eroded that trust with your community, I don't think you get that back. You only have one shot anymore. It's not 3 strikes. This isn't baseball.
I think you make an excellent point, Eric. And all of the things that we have talked about today, not only apply to wildfire insurance, but they apply to all kinds of perils. Windstorms, especially back east, those are getting stronger, more frequent. And all of the things that Eric and I are talking about in terms of how to prepare your underwriting submission and how to quantify that risk apply across all of
I think
those.
the other piece to this is that when we're talking about these having these conversations, showing meaningful, understood or using understood technologies, I think is super important these days. I recognize that our size may not be as large as others, but I do think you need to really be in control of your destiny. You need to be taking proactive, meaningful, quantifiable steps that you can show. It may be 1 or 2 spans, it may be 10 spans, it may be 10 miles, it may be 10,000 miles that you can actually proactively take action on, but that is going to show your efforts and provide some level of confidence, maybe really meaningful confidence to the underwriter community when you're actually taking proactive steps to reduce your risk and reduce the consequences. That's the other component to this, is utilities are a very small percentage in the overall scope of ignitions. Especially in California, 90% of the ignitions are non-utility related. So that means there's a lot of ignitions happening outside of the utility infrastructure, which is all being insured over time, right? So if you can reduce the consequences of a catastrophic event burning into or around your assets where the damage is minimized, you are now stacking on not only risk reduction, but consequence reduction from another event somewhere else.
One of the comments we get most frequently is just appreciation for the comprehensive nature of the presentation that we provide. Because we talk about SMUD as a whole. SMUD has 2 very distinct operating territories. Sacramento County, which is mostly urban, residential. We've got, fire service within about 9 miles of any particular area in the county. So it's a very low risk. But then we have our transmission assets up in El Dorado County that serve our hydro powerhouses, and that's a high risk fire threat area. And, talking about how we manage those 2 different risks, although we have a enterprise-wide risk mitigation strategy, we manage them a little bit differently just based on those 2 very distinct territories. And they really appreciate how we outline that. And they talk about really appreciating having our subject matter experts. Eric is one of them, but we also are willing to bring in other experts. We'll bring in power generation to talk about how they manage those assets, talking about, the powerhouses up there, how they're built, how we manage the areas around them so that, we're reducing the risk to the actual structures and the people who work in them. We talk about our fire and life safety programs, and we talk about the fact that we have met or exceeded OSHA standards. Our folks up in the hydro assets are voluntary VPP certified. And that means they're, participating in our safety programs. We talk about the awards that SMUD has won and how we work with the community. One of the big things that we talk about is how do we participate if and when a fire happens, because we've got our teams involved with that emergency response group so that they know where our assets are located, they know where our people are located, and they know our emergency response plans. And that's critical. So, just being very open with them, and we just get a lot of appreciation for bringing them the facts when they didn't know the questions they wanted answered. And that's really important that we're thinking about these things before they ask the questions.
Well, Anna Marie brings something up that reminds me of one area in the last 2 years that has been pretty well discussed and probed by the underwriters, and that was the right-of-way stewardship accreditation. That in and of itself was one of the most meaningful discussions that we had in some of those underwriter meetings. After the majority of the content was shared, that was an area that they really went back in and had a lot of conversation around. And when we were able to share what that meant and the rigor that goes into it, that it's not just an award, it's not just checking a box, it's not just a certification, but it has meaningful execution requirements included in it. And then it's also looked at by third-party subject matter experts to add that additional level of emphasis that you are actually executing on these results that you say you're doing. It was a game changer from the underwriter perspective. That was a lot of conversation about how much rigor goes into that and how meaningful that accreditation was, showing the best practices and execution that you're delivering on your assets.
So that's interesting. I've not heard that about using the right-of-way steward accreditation in that way, but it makes sense. A little surprised that they get into that level of detail. And they really want to know what you're doing.
They really do. And right now, a main focus for insurers is environmental, social, and governance, or ESG issues. So that right-of-way stewardship checks all of those boxes. Not only are we meeting and exceeding our management of the risk for wildfire, but we are participating in environmental sustainability. We are participating in improving the life of the customers that we serve and the communities that surround our assets. And it shows the involvement of our governance structure and the support that we receive. So that right-of-way stewardship, from an insurance standpoint, hits all the right marks.
Wow. It's really interesting how you're working with the underwriter. You're educating the underwriter. You have a message for them, and they're receptive. I know you two make a pretty good team, and you're also speaking to our industry, your industry, the insurance industry, or other utilities. So talk to us a little bit about that communication piece.
I think this just goes back to how did Eric get involved really with the insurance program, and it goes back to part of my job is really understanding SMUD's operations, because I have to be able to translate that in a way that the insurance underwriters can understand. What are we doing? How does that how can I describe that from an exposure standpoint, and how are we mitigating the risk of that exposure? And so I am reaching out to many of our industry, of our organizational experts, to have those conversations. Talking to our power gen director, talking to our asset managers and saying, how do you manage this when this happens? What are you doing to reduce this risk? So my education from them is critical. And sometimes I start talking to an expert like Eric, and I realize this is so above my ability to translate in a way that will be meaningful, that I bring them into the conversation. So I have brought our power gen director in, because I can't talk about this big equipment in a way that's going to resonate. Geez, I can't even say the word today. Resonate
Yeah.
in a way that they will understand it. But when you hear the passion, experience, and just the I don't know, the joy that they bring to the job that they're doing, and just how they execute this, it makes a huge difference. And the industry has gained from that. When Eric first started talking to these underwriters, he would challenge them and he would say, are you aware? Did you know? Are you looking at? Have you considered? And it's really brought up their awareness. So we have kind of taken it upon ourselves in these underwriting presentations to not only provide them with information about SMUD and its exposures, but educate them further so that when they go to their next potential client, they can ask these hard questions. And they have mentioned that they are doing that they are taking some of the structure of the presentations that we provide them and just asking the questions, because they're not getting that kind of information from their other insureds.
Yeah, I think, Phil, we have seen that there's a need in some respects. I mean, we got really great feedback. I think that was the foundation of this for us over multiple sessions with the underwriters. And then the questions that they had, sure, they were candid. We were in confidential meetings, if you will, but the questions that they had really resonated to me and Anna Marie that, hey, I think the industry could use some feedback or some guidance in this space. What is going on in this space? What kind of questions are we getting asked? And what kind of results are we getting from the underwriter teams? And we've had this conversation most meaningful in the last year. So this particular year, 2024, kind of sharing that, hey, I think it's worth putting together some content and getting out on the road and getting to some of these venues to share this message and the results. It's here's what we were successful at. We're all on a journey. We all have a trail that we're walking through, a path that we're on. But here were some meaningful items for us that resonated with this industry that everyone is working with. So knowing that and then trying to get out to the markets, whether that be in the utility space or whether it be in the insurance space, and sharing some of the information that we've compiled and curated in the last several years. And those results over time can be shown. We're going to get on a little bit of a presentation and sharing mission in 2025.
Yeah, good. Well, you need to do that because, as you said, they can either be proactive or they're going to be reactive. So proactive is always better.
What's unfortunate is that everybody needs to buy insurance, and we need to have a meaningful level of insurance that we all have, whether you're a private citizen or a corporation or an organization. But also thinking about that, all of the money that is moving into the insurance space does provide value. It provides security in an event of a catastrophic scenario. But I think about it is how much of that money or those dollars could be doing meaningful forest health work or meaningful improvements in assets, hardening, things of those natures, which we could actually be doing more with the dollars that we are pushing into this space, actually doing executable, proactive work that's going to provide decades of meaningful improvements over time.
You know, this has really been fascinating. I appreciate it. By far, we've gone on. I've taken advantage of your time. So are there any last comments or things that we missed or that you'd like to bring up before we close out?
You know, I just appreciate the time and appreciate the opportunity to share some dialogue. Fortunately for us, some really great successes and meaningful efforts that we've gone through as a coordinated, collaborative team, but also I guess I would just continue to share the olive branch that we have extended to the community, utility and otherwise, that is looking for guidance or is looking for just some general interest in what we've done. We'd be happy to share.
Eric, Anna Marie, I just appreciate your being on. This has really been an interesting topic, and thank you for allowing us to take your time plus more than what we originally asked. So thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Trees and Lines, brought to you by Iapetus Holdings. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. If you have any questions or comments on any of our episodes or ideas for topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact us at treesandlines@iapetusllc.com. We'll chat with you soon.